I am Oddball, and I'm a bit of a nut for 3D printing. And in the past, when I first looked into 3D printing 6-7 years ago, you were still looking at, even for bare bones printers, that you had to completely source the materials and build yourself. You were still looking at $7,000-8,000, which for a lot of people, if they have no idea whether they actually want to do it or not, that's a lot of money. These days, you can get into 3D printing for under $300. That's a lot more doable, right? Just about everything that I have on the table here was printed with a printer that I think at the time I paid $260 for, and I honestly bought it because I had Amazon points saved up and won a Amazon gift card and got it for free. So out of the folks here, have any of you guys played with 3D printers before?
My friends have it.
Friends have it?
Yeah, you good?
I'm good. Thanks. And you can actually get them for, now there's a clone of the printer that I use for $160, I think, which is kind of insane. So before I start, is there anything in particular people want me to cover, or just general usage? General usage? Okay. So if you're looking into 3D printing, there's two main technologies. There are printers that use filament, reels of filament, FDM printers, and there are resin printers. Resin printers are wonderful if you're wanting to print like tabletop miniatures. Small things, very high detail. They have their downsides. The downsides with resin printers is you're dealing with a liquid printing solution, for one. So you have to have this tray of liquid resin that you put in and take out of your printer. So there's a certain amount that you will use every print just to fill up the vat. Has anyone not seen like a time lapse of a resin printer? Okay. Resin printers are, and if I had looks like they're warming it up. And of course, if I had internet access. Resin printers are really neat to watch in time lapse. I'm not sure I'd want to sit there and watch it in real time because the print plate actually dips into the solution. And what happens is there's either an LED panel or a laser emitter under it that shoots up UV light into the resin and hardens the resin. So as the plate comes up, the print, it looks like it's just pulling this solid thing out of a liquid pool of liquid, which it is, but it's really neat to watch. Like I said, the downside is you're dealing with liquids, so there's always that possibility of a mess. You're dealing with something that can be toxic. It is highly recommended that whenever you're around the printer, you wear a mask, you wear gloves, you don't want the stuff to get on you. And then you have to do post-processing where you have another machine that basically sprays it down with some isopropyl alcohol to get some of the excess resin off and bakes it further with UV light. And then after that, you have this kind of toxic sludge you have to figure out how to deal with. At which point, some people say just throw it down the drain. Other people say, no, you need to find a special waste management place to deal with it. So I went with, because I'm lazy and whenever I'm dealing with, and you might not want to be around it while it's running. I'm not sure I want that in my house without also setting up air scrubbers around it and all that fun stuff. So I went with the filament printers, which aren't particularly great for miniatures because of the size of... So does everybody have a grasp as to how 3D printers work? Okay, you got it slices it up into individual layers and puts down one layer at a time, right? So a filament printer, those layers are somewhere between 0.1 millimeter and 0.4 millimeter high, versus a resin printer that you're looking at an order of magnitude smaller than that. You're looking at 0.02 millimeters tall. So you can see why, for folks that print out a lot of gaming figures, they'll go with the resin printers. It just makes a lot more sense. But if you want larger things and stuff you don't have to post-process, and the thing that I love about filament printers is the fact that you have a spool of filament on the machine and you just let it run. And when it's done, cool. If you want to print something else out, it's already prepped for you. You don't have to worry about the levels of assuming that there's still a decent amount on that spool. And if you want to change it out, it's real easy to change out. So with and I do have to apologize a little bit. I had an actual presentation with slides and stuff, but the computer that I had it on crashed last night, and I could rebuild this presentation or the other presentation that I'm doing that kind of requires a lot of pictures. So I rebuilt that one and doing this off the cuff. So the big things so I went with the Creality Ender 3, and one of the things that's great about 3D printing is there's a huge community now out there. And if you go with one of the popular machines, there are a bunch of forums you can go to for help. There are and there are a bunch of sites that go, okay, I already have this particular thing designed specifically for your printer. If you want to design something yourself, you have to use some sort of CAD program like Fusion 360. There is a very scaled down version, piece of software. There's Blender, which is not scaled down at all, which is free, open source, not necessarily terribly newbie friendly, but that's the case with a lot of stuff. Tinkercad. Sorry, there's a website, tinkercad.com, that actually has the software built into the web browser, has some tutorials, and was designed as a teaching aid, so that if you've never used this kind of design software before, it's great, one, to be able to design things easily, and two, to kind of learn the mentality of how you design stuff. It's a little bit different than your normal drawing program. There's the way of thinking is different. Of course, if you're not quite there yet, there's also a bunch of sites that have things already pre-designed for you. I love going to Thingiverse and seeing what's on there. In fact, just about everything on the table here is from a design that I pulled off of Thingiverse. Which everything on Thingiverse is free to download. And I'd say probably about 90% of the stuff there is stuff that people have actually printed, tested, make sure actually work. I have run into a couple where I then looked at the design and went, yeah, now that I'm looking at your design files, this doesn't work. but most of the stuff does. And so once you have that program, once you have that design, you put it into some slicer software. Be it I typically use a program called Cura. There's also Prusa, I'm sorry. And there's a new one that just came out that a lot of people have been excited about called Super Slicer, which is a fork off of Prusa that I should probably look into. But you take the design, you put it into your slicer program, you have it angled, you figure out, okay, well, I need to have this object at this angle to whether it be to actually fit on your bed.
Hello.
Okay. Whether it be to fit on your bed or to actually.
Hello.
I think the mic next door is okay. Or to straight up print correctly. To print it all, because of course you have to make sure that you're not printing out in empty space where nothing's there. Or if you need to add supports, you can add supports, change densities, this, that, and the other. One thing that I've gotten kind of obsessed with is you can actually do a lot of what's called print in place, where you actually have the mechanism, you have all the objects printed at the same time. Like this guy was printed as one piece. I had to do a little bit of breaking it free, but not by much. So you can have gears and moving objects inside your print, maybe with some assembly, maybe with none whatsoever. One thing that people tend to not pay attention to is how much time it's going to take to print. While obviously I am a big fan of 3D printing, it is by far not instant. This little Planetary Gear, I think, took 3 hours to print. This guy took like a week to print all the pieces. But that being said, that was me having made sure the design file was right, ran it through the slicer. That took, that takes a couple of minutes. Sending it over to the printer, hitting print, and then checking on it periodically to make sure that it's printing right. So while, yes, there are instances where I could have gone out to the store, bought materials, and built something very similar in a lot less time by hand, that requires me actually being there doing it versus just like I said, periodically checking to make sure that the filament is still running through the machine. It hasn't broken or anything. Or there's sometimes you'll have instances where the filament will just decide, you know what, I'm not going to stick to the print bed anymore. And all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 layers of good stuff that got thrown on the floor, and then you just have what's referred to as spaghetti being printed out. You can also, there's another print in place thing that actually does have a spring built into it. It's plastic, so I'm not expecting the spring to last very long. I printed that guy out a couple months ago, and the spring has weakened a little bit, but so it's never going to be as good as metal, but you can have some of that stuff. Trying to think what else I was. Does anyone have any questions about anything?
If you do a filament print of a venture,
Mm-hmm.
you
Is it possible to smooth out the lines?
Absolutely. So, what you do with dealing with the lines is I would start with some fine grit sandpaper. And then you can get some fairly thick primer paint and put that over. Now, my issue with using a filament printer for miniatures is, one, you're not going to get the detail that you want. And two, if you have anything like a very thin piece for like an axe or a spear or something, if it is at an angle, it's gonna have a lot of difficulty printing, just because you're looking at right, and you're looking at 0.4 millimeters wide and 0.1 millimeters tall, and that sounds really tiny, and it kind of is. But when you're talking about something the size of like a wargaming miniature, that's going to be a problem. Now, if you're printing out something like, if you're printing out a little vehicle like a tank or a car or something like that, you shouldn't have any issues. I will say for the, I was talking about trying to find the right angle for things to fit on your print bed. The printer that, my first printer, the Ender 3 V2 I was talking about, has a print bed of 230 millimeters square and can print up to 300 millimeters tall. To give you an idea, I had to aim it about there for this thing to fit, for the 300 millimeters tall. So obviously you can print a lot of cosplay pieces and stuff like that, but if you're wanting like a chest plate or something like that, you will need to get a little creative, including chopping up your pieces. Like this guy right here is actually, I printed him in 5 different pieces. One for the latch in the back so I can actually get to the guts. But to actually get the pieces that for it to actually fit on the printer, I had to slice it up into 5 different pieces to actually print and then put them back together.
So, is there a cost difference between filament and resin?
There is. Resin printers, especially for size, resin printers are more expensive. For an entry-level resin printer, and remember, you have to buy or build or do something for the refinishing, for the finishing stage as well for resin printers. Resin printers for, I think currently Elegoo sells their Mars, which is a 180 or 200 millimeter square plate resin printer for, I want to say $250. And then once you get into, and then you're spending another $150 for a finishing station of about the same size. Now you can always, with resin printers, you can always do it the cheap way and just get a bucket, fill it with isopropyl alcohol, dip it in there, and then set it out in the sun, assuming that it's not like today and there is a sun outside. But I would highly recommend going with a station, just because it is a lot easier and a lot more consistent, et cetera, et cetera. While with the filament printers, like I said, you can, an entry-level filament printer, you can start at $150, $300. Now, with both of them, you can go up to sky's the limit on price, depending on size, depending on how fast it goes, how fast it heats up. As far as the print material goes, that varies all over the place depending on what kind of filament you're using. For filament, just give you an idea, I'm much more keyed into price of filament over the resin. But the filament, I can get bulk deals where I'm buying 10 reels at a time, and they go by weight instead of length, which annoys me. But that's the industry standard, is to where I'm paying about $10-12 for a kilogram filament, which will give you an idea. This printer or this computer took about 1.5 rolls of filament to print out. If you're buying it individually, expect to pay more, along the lines of $20 to $24 for the cheap stuff, and that's PLA or PLA Plus, which, unless if you have a specific reason to print using a different material, like if you wanted a flexible material or you wanted something that was a lot more heat resistant, or something that was just straight up stronger, I'd stay with PLA because it's the cheapest out there. It's easy to deal with. And if it matters to you, PLA is organic. It's corn based instead of petroleum, like a lot of the other ones are. And to give you an idea about it being easier, PLA has a print temperature where it's somewhere between, depending on your printer, depending on the environment, yada, 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 somewhere between 180 to 220 degrees Celsius, which is somewhere between 350 and 430 Fahrenheit. And you want to have your bed heated to help with the filament actually sticking to it, and it would be at like 60 degrees Celsius, which is 150 Fahrenheit. I may have that wrong. 60 degrees Celsius, yeah. And if you go to like nylon, which is a great strong material to use, but one, you're going to need the print nozzle to get up closer to 300 degrees Celsius, and you want your print bed to be around like 100 degrees Celsius. So that's a pretty big step up, and there's some things that you do need to take into account. My printer, the print bed has a metal sheet that's held on by a magnet, which is great because I can take the metal sheet off if I'm having problems getting the print to actually release after I'm done printing, and just flex the sheet and it pops off. Problem is, if I heat the print bed up to 100 degrees Celsius, that's past the point where that magnet starts demagnifying. Now, there are other options. You can go with a glass plate where you're using binder clips on there. But then you can't do the nifty trick of flexing the glass plate. And also, of course, nylon filament is significantly more expensive than the PLA filament. So the folks that I know that do stuff in the higher end filaments, they'll usually print a test using PLA just to make sure it works. Make sure that they're happy with how it looks, etc. and then use the more expensive stuff. Does that make sense? Okay. And I have a few things up here if you guys want to take a look at them on what you can print with an El Cheapo 3D printer. Yeah, like I said, time-wise, there's a little phone stand that I printed out, and this took 40 minutes. Which is why, I considered bringing in my 3D printer, but one, I'd have to then make sure the bed was properly leveled and calibrated and all that fun stuff, which takes 20, 30 minutes. And then I don't really have anything I could actually print out in an hour time frame. But like I said, for the most part, it's hit print, make sure it actually starts printing properly, and then walk away, come back after a couple hours, and hey, my print is done. That reminds me. Most printers will have a micro SD or SD card slot on them. You put them in, it's got a menu on board, hit print. I would highly recommend, if you get into 3D printing, look into some software called Octoprint. And you can get a Raspberry Pi, which if you don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, I've got one in here somewhere. It is a little computer on a single board that costs $45 It runs Linux, and you can run Octoprint on it, hook it up to your printer, and get to it from your network. So you have your big, powerful computer that's actually doing the slicing, getting stuff prepared. And all you have to do is open up a web browser, point the web browser at the IP address of the Octoprint computer, and send it there. Also, Octoprint will happily supports most webcams, so you can set up a webcam pointed at your printer, and that way, if you're like me and have your printer in your basement, I can just pull up a web browser from my desk in my office, look at it that way instead of having to walk down and checking to see if my print is done or if I'm printing out spaghetti or whatnot. There is, if you're a little bit more geekier, there is a setup called Clipper with a K, Klipper, that actually moves a lot of the functions off of the 3D printer onto the Raspberry Pi, and which allows the printer to run a lot faster and have a lot more options at your disposal. Downside is, if you're not familiar with Linux, I'm not sure I would recommend it. There are folks that has been their first foray into Linux, but there is a bit of a learning curve, and there's a little bit more of you staring at a command line. Octoprint is a lot more user-friendly with a GUI point-and-click interface. And like I said, if you guys want to come up here and take a look at some of the stuff, you can see the layer lines that I was talking about with, if you were curious with the miniatures, especially I think on this guy, it's pretty clear.
I had a friend do a 3D print of a miniature with a filament one.
Mm-hmm.
And I had another friend do it with resin, and I can tell the difference.
Oh yeah, it's and printing out with miniatures to be successful at all with printing out a miniature with filament, you have to have your printer really calibrated well and have everything set just right to get it to really do well. Sir.
Yeah, you mentioned Clipper. Have you found moving to Clipper from Marlin to be worth the effort and to be worth everything that you have to change over? It looks like the feature set of Clipper would be great going forward, but I'm so invested with my printers on Marlin and compiling my own firmware and everything like that. It's almost like, well, it's not broke, I don't want to fix it. But it's Clipper. Have you found Clipper to really be a monumental step ahead?
Yes, I have.
Is there a reason that you can just do all the reconfigurations and then just save it and then just re-roll the firmware essentially without recompiling it? Because that seems to me to be the biggest advantage.
Well, and for those that don't know, what he's talking about with Marlin is the firmware that comes on a lot of printers, and it is great firmware, and is open source, which I like. And the reason why I went to Clipper originally was one of my other printers came with Cheetu firmware, which bugged the heck out of me. Clipper, you will get things, it will be a lot faster. And I definitely have enjoyed the switch to Clipper, even from Marlin. Again, my day job is I'm a systems administrator, and my wife is a software automations specialist. So we live in a pretty geeky household. And like I said, I'm used to staring at a Linux command line. If you're since you're obviously already pretty deep into 3D printing, and it sounds like you have multiple printers.
I do. Yeah, I've got two right now.
Okay, which ones do you have?
I've got the Ninja 3 Pro and CR10S.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So it's medium format, and I guess a bit of a larger format.
Yeah, it's the CR10S is generally considered a large format.
Yeah. It's an older printer, but
it's
not a lot of mods to it, and it runs great.
Yeah, and that is definitely something you will do when you get into 3D printing. There's a joke in the community that get into 3D printing, and at least 90% of the stuff that you print will be modifications for your printer. And that's only half a joke. I think Clipper is great. Now the thing is with those printers, remember that it is really easy to flash the firmware. So you can always flash the Clipper firmware, and if you don't like it, it's real easy to put Marlin back on it. Now, again, so do you run? Do you have a Raspberry Pi hooked up to yours? Or?
I do, yeah. I've got a Docker print on each one of them.
Okay.
And so my approach was I was just going to image the SD card and then put Clipper on the Raspberry Pi and then just give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like how with Clipper you do everything inside a configuration file.
Yeah.
And save it, and Clipper just reboots and reconfigures itself based on the file.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to quote unquote recompile the firmware even for just a minor change.
Right.
That was the biggest selling point to me.
Yeah, because it's really, and it's something that kind of annoys me with. There's a couple times in 3D printing community that you're going to run into people where the community as general uses a term that's not the correct term. And one of those is with firmware. You talk to the Clipper community and they'll say, oh yeah, no, you're now moving all of the firmware onto the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, it's not firmware at all.
No.
It's software.
It's software. You're still... And they're saying, well, you need to flash the firmware to the Pi. It's like, no, you're still needing to flash firmware to the printer, but you're moving a lot of the logic off of the printer
offload to the Pi.
Onto the Pi.
Yeah.
And what I would absolutely recommend also, since you're not sure, is you can always either clone a copy of the micro SD card you have in your Pi, or just buy another micro SD card.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was going to approach it. It's just that Marlin runs really well on them right now, and it's like, God, man, do I really want to go down the road of...
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I was very nervous about doing much of anything until I had the second printer. Yeah. And that way, it's like, well, I can mess with the second with one printer and still have one going. And yeah, the other printer I bought was a Tronxy X5 SA Pro, which I won in an auction for like $100. I would never pay full price for that thing. And frankly, I wouldn't recommend that printer to anybody. I'm still having some problems with it.
Do you have a Core XY printer by any chance?
That Tronxy is a Core XY.
The Tronxy is a Core XY? Mm-hmm. Okay, I just went...
And I don't think that's the issues that I'm having. If you look at the reviews of that Tronxy, they are very mixed. And I was kind of on... I wanted another printer. I wanted a larger printer, and I wanted an XY printer. And it was do I do this, or do I do the Voron build? Which I know a guy who just finished doing. Which the Voron build, for those that don't know, is the old school, here, tell us the printer you want, and we will give you a spreadsheet of all the parts you need to go buy. And then you can build it yourself.
They're still expensive.
Yeah. Now, you should end up with a fairly high-end printer at the end, but you're going to be paying for the part somewhere between $1,200 and $2,000. But yeah, I would.
So you're high on Clipper overall, then?
I'm pretty happy with Clipper. There's some things that it's a bit of a pain to do things like if you want time lapse. Octoprint is its plugin environment and all that is a lot.
It's so well supported.
It is a lot easier.
It's very extensible. That's what I found. With
and also you can use Octoprint with Clipper.
Yes.
So I'm using Mainsail right now with my Clipper setup. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have two of them. The speed of my prints probably increased about 25%.
That's significant.
Yeah.
No loss of quality or anything like that?
No loss of quality.
Okay.
It was all just on the moving the logic to
How it optimized the character.
Yeah.
The head and everything. Yeah, okay. Wow.
Because the little processor on those control boards honestly makes the Raspberry Pi look like a supercomputer.
Okay, cool. I was just curious. I appreciate it. Thank
you. Which again, that time frame doesn't sound like a big deal when you're going from 2 hours to 1 hour 50, but it's not uncommon for me to feed my printer. It's like, yes, here's something that should be done in 14 hours.
Yeah.
I'll
do numerous multi-day prints, and so
a couple of these parts because I wanted the density. It was this will take 2.5 days. Which, yes, they talk about using 3D printers for rapid prototyping. And if you're like me and a layman in that field, okay, so that should be fast. It's like, yeah, you don't understand. The old prototyping would be come back in a month. So with you having, and sorry to ask you this, but with you having that CR10. I guess you've had it for a couple years.
I have, yeah.
Cool. I've got.
Yeah, and then I actually bought the Ender 3 first, and then found the CR10S. It's been nicer because, well, I wouldn't say nicer. It's handy to have that larger format printer because it's just I can just do more with it.
Oh yeah.
The Ender 3 is great for small parts, but for big parts like for cosplay parts or something like that, the CR10S is fantastic by comparison because the bed is just so much bigger, and it can just turn out just so much larger prints.
Yeah, the CR10 that's getting close to the size where you can just print an entire helmet.
Yeah, it's very close. It's very close. It's an older printer. Don't get me wrong. By the age of the industry, it's a bit of an older printer, but I've done manual replacements on it and stuff like that to help to kind of help it along. So.
Okay. What board are you running on it now?
I'm running one of the TX3D, the Easy Board,
Okay.
the Easy Boards, because I went with them because I use the Easy ADL as my bed leveling sensor. So I just stuck with them. So
that is one thing with that you will for those that don't know what we're talking about with the bed leveling, you will spend a lot of time leveling beds. And that's another term that, yes, technically the community is using the wrong term. Should be tram, but because I've seen new people come on and say, yeah, I was leveling the bed with a mineral spirit level. It's, no. What it is trying to make sure that the height of the nozzle when it comes down to the bed is consistent across the entire bed. And with the Ender 3 series, you're doing that manually with some knobs under the bed. Or the CR10, and you can do modifications to the Ender 3 series where you actually have a probe on the print head that will that you can run a command that it'll check the height at X number of spots. I've found doing auto leveling with Clipper to be a lot easier than with Marlin. And Mainsail specifically has a wonderful, here's a map of just how warped your bed is.
My print reliability went up significantly though once I started using a bed leveling sensor.
Okay.
Because I just don't have to level my bed any longer. I haven't touched my leveling knobs in a year.
Nice.
I run a leveling mesh before every single print, which is probably overkill, but it's the reliability just went up significantly after putting one of those on.
Well, and you're talking about a job that takes a minute when you're dealing with, if you're dealing with a print that you're planning on taking 2 days on.
Yes. Yeah, because the first layers now come out nice and even and everything like that. It's the way to go.
Nice.
Yeah.
I guess if there's no other questions, hope you guys have a good rest of the day.